So one of the reasons why I got really involved with advocacy work is because, one, I have always been very proud to be Cham. I've always told everybody that I've been Cham. Anytime anybody asks me, what are you, where are you from, where's your family from, I always acknowledge my Cham heritage. Whereas I noticed that there was a lot of disconnect with a lot of the Cham people that said they were either from the countries that they're from and not acknowledging their Cham ethnicities. And I thought that it was very important that we go ahead and preserve our culture. People won't know what we are, and we won't be able to preserve that if we don't continue educating people who we are and what we are. So that was one of the reasons why I've always been very involved. My father did a lot of work. He had me editing papers numerous amounts of times on the power plant that was being done, submitting papers and letters to the Vietnamese government, and also wanting to educate other people about it as well. So that's kind of how I got started. It's always been very interesting that I felt like there were a lot of people within the Cham community, especially my generation and younger, who aren't aware of their history and aren't aware of the Cham history. And that's very important to know your history so you can know your future. Once you eliminate your history, you're eliminating your future. So we've done a lot of work as far as going and lobbying on Capitol Hill, going to the White House and speaking out about what's going on to the indigenous peoples. And that's another important thing, is distinguishing the difference between the minorities and indigenous peoples. So the Vietnamese government tends to acknowledge the Cham people as being a minority group as opposed to indigenous groups, which is totally inaccurate, because we were there before they are. So I always like to present it as, I always compare it to the Native Americans in America or the Kashmiri people in India and Pakistan. So when you put it in those terms, people understand a little bit better. The reason why the Vietnamese government doesn't want to acknowledge the Cham people as being indigenous is because they would have to give a certain reparations. They would have to be responsible for certain things, financially, land-wise, otherwise. And we meet all the requirements according to UNICEF and the UN for being indigenous people. So that's one of the main reasons why we've been advocating so hard for trying to get indigenous status. But obviously there are other ways we also have to get a little bit more involved in some of these other discussions so that people can be aware of what's happening within our group. So the power plant is one of the main things that's happening, and people's lands are being taken away so that they can build these power plants, and so they can kind of commit, in a sense, ethnic cleansing. So people's lands are being taken away so they can build these power plants that are being funded by Russia and China and North Korea and very communist countries, whereas the US is also very involved as well. So we've also went and spoke to the trade commissions to speak about why they shouldn't lift the sanctions on Vietnam. And those discussions have been a little contentious, and they always say, well, we're not in the jobs of dealing with human rights. We're more in terms of dealing with foreign policy, which for whatever reason they want to disregard the human rights issues that are going on in Vietnam right now. So we've also aligned ourselves with organizations like the Boat People SOS and the Council of Indigenous People in Today's Vietnam. So that council, CIP-TVN, also includes the Mountaineer people and the Khmer Krom, who are also indigenous people in Vietnam that are also being affected in the same ways. So we've kind of aligned ourselves with them to have a bigger voice, which is what we did when we went to the Vietnamese Advocacy Day on Capitol Hill and at the White House. So when you have larger groups of people that are going to speak out, people will listen. And those organizations have also been very involved on the ground floor, speaking to policymakers, council members in their communities, speaking to representatives in Congress and in Senate, and also being very active with the UN and everybody else. And they've also given us a lot of guidance and direction. We've had great people that have kind of given us that guidance and helping us understand how to navigate these organizations and kind of getting our message across. Going to the UN was very eye-opening. I wasn't sure what to expect. It's quite interesting because you see a lot of other NGOs. You see some propaganda from some of the countries that are trying to, kind of create like a smear campaign against people who are speaking out about what the governments are doing. Vietnam is quite interesting because when they go, they won't really surface. They won't really show their faces. They won't even let people really know that they're there. So that was quite interesting to see. You see other countries like China that have issues with the Uyghur people who are Muslim indigenous groups, and people in Syria and all these other countries that also have very similar issues. But you also see the perspective of the governments that are being represented and how they kind of acknowledge these issues. And most of the time they try to disregard the NGOs and they try to diminish whatever their word is by saying, oh no, these things aren't happening. So even with some of the things that I've gone to at the White House and on Capitol Hill, they're like, oh no, the Vietnamese governments are telling us that they're doing all these amazing things, and yet this is all propaganda from the government, such as saying that they're building all of these Catholic temples and Hindu temples for people to be able to practice their religions freely. And majority of the time, it's not true. What they're doing is they're building these structures, and they're actually paying people to pretend to do this as a sort of horse and pony show for other people, like governments and dignitaries, to say, oh no, these things aren't happening. They try to paint this image that's not really going on. So, of course, they want to say that everything's picture perfect and people aren't being persecuted and people aren't having their rights taken away, which is not really the truth. So, when you're at the UN, you see all of these different things, but you also see how important your voice can be, because now you're up in front of everybody in the world literally being represented, and so you now have a voice. It's only 3 minutes, but you can get a lot across. So we even came across other people from other countries who took an interest in what we were talking about, people from Denmark, Iraq, and all kinds of other places that were like, oh, well, we never knew about these people. Can you tell me more? We want more information. How can we get involved? And those people were also resourceful, like the woman that we met from Denmark. She was a wealth of knowledge, and she gave us even more information. So it's very valuable. You learn about what other countries are doing, and you also learn about other ways that we can be more powerful delivering our message and making a change. I think...
Kalila, I'm going to interrupt you a little bit. I'm going to, if you haven't noticed, there's a big image of Kalila. We're going to show, due to time, we're going to show a clip of the testimony that Kalila made on behalf of all of us at the UN meeting in 2013.
And there's no sound.
You got to put the sound thing.
I will say, even putting together the presentation, Julie, Aziza, all the elders that were involved did a lot of research. You have to be very factual when you're presenting, because people will fact check what you're presenting to them. You can't come up with inaccurate information, because that will totally discredit everything that you're doing and everything that you're saying. So a lot of work has to be done in terms of putting together these presentations and really getting to the point of what message do we want them to get? What is our point being there? What do we want accomplished? We presented the issues that were going on, and then at the same time, we also presented recommendations to the Vietnamese government on what we would like to see happen moving forward. I think it seemed like it was very well received, but you never really know. You get these reports a week later, and they're very extensive on what you've presented, what other people have presented, and some of the recommendations and how people want to move forward. And it's also very useful for us to look at what other people are doing, for us to get a better understanding of some of the things that we might also want to implement. I highly encourage everybody, youth, elders, whoever, get involved on the ground level. Look at what's going on. All this information is online. Everybody has Google. I know everybody here is on social media in some kind of way, whether it's Facebook, it's Twitter, whatever. utilize these resources that are available. The UN's website it's a wealth of information. They have so much information about upcoming sessions that are going on that have to do with the indigenous people, the minorities, UN human rights. Look at those things. Look at what your Congress members are doing in terms of foreign affairs and foreign policy. Look at what the lawmakers are doing. Who's involved in lifting these sanctions and trade commissions? So everybody, please get involved as much as possible. If you have any questions, ask any one of us, and we're more than willing to give you that information.
Champa people and to preserve their identities. Vietnam has 54 ethnic groups, including the Champa people, who are descendants of the ancient kingdom of Champa in central Vietnam. Today, their population is comprised of 130,000 people.